The shears that cut off Ellen Padgett's hair were her mother's shears, and Mrs. Winifred Stroud had taken the trouble to use them. They lay open on the counter of the repository when Ellen came in out of the November rain, and she knew them across the room by the nick in the lower blade. Her mother had bought them in Nottingham for 11 shillings the year Ellen was born. They had gone out of the workroom drawer on the 6th of the month, and until that moment Ellen had believed she had lost them. "Shut the door," Mrs. Stroud said. "The cold gets in." There were 4 women in the front room, and not one of them was the client Ellen had been sent for. Dinah Kirk stood at the shelf of pomatum pots, studying the floorboards as though she meant to buy them. 2 of the town's dressers waited by the fire in their outdoor cloaks, which was its own kind of information, since nobody keeps a cloak on indoors unless she expects to use her hands. Mrs. Stroud stood behind the counter in mustard silk, with a black lace cap pinned over her grey hair, smiling the smile she kept for a customer who had come in for something small and was going to leave, having bought something large. "There has been a complaint," she said, "from a lady I shall not name. Hair given into your keeping and sold on. Sold to the wig trade in Nottingham, by weight, like fleece." "That is not true," Ellen said. "It is being said." "By you." Mrs. Stroud's smile did not alter. It was the kind of smile that had never in 52 years been required to answer anything. "You have a very great deal of hair," she said, "for a woman who tells us she does not deal in it." Ellen understood then, and understanding took less than a second, and the second after that, the 2 dressers had her by the arms. She did not scream. She did not beg. She stood with her chin level and counted, because counting was what her mother had taught her to do with a minute that could not be shortened, and she had got as far as 9 when the shears closed the first time at the nape of her neck. It took 4 cuts. Auburn hair is heavy when it is long, and hers had reached the small of her back, and it came away altogether in one thick rope and swung once in Mrs. Stroud's fist before it was laid on the counter. The rest of it fell where it wanted to, down the front of Ellen's gown and onto the boards among the mud that had come in on 4 pairs of pattens. "There," said Mrs. Stroud, "comfortable now. You will not be dressing anybody's head at Tarrant Hall looking like that." The dressers let go. Dinah Kirk did not lift her eyes from the floor, and what Dinah Kirk was thinking would matter a great deal in 5 weeks' time, though nobody in the room knew it yet. Ellen knelt down. She did not gather up her hair, though the wanting to was so strong it felt like a hand at her throat. She went through it with 2 fingers until she found a narrow ribbon of dark green watered silk, 3/4 of a yard of it, faded along one edge where 19 years of daylight had got at it. She drew it out of the ruin on the floor and shook it once. Then she stood up in front of 4 women and a looking-glass and tied it into what was left of her hair, and the bow she made was not hurried. "Good afternoon," she said, and went out into the rain. The town of Nether Wickham lies in a fold of Nottinghamshire, and it had a corn market on Wednesdays, and, on the north side of the square, gilt letters in a window reading Stroud's Repository for the Toilette. It had also, in a narrow house in Slape Lane, a hairdresser named Padgett, and the arrangement between the 2 had held a long time in the manner of most arrangements, which is to say by the smaller party never once being asked whether it suited her. Ellen Padgett was 24 and had 2 trades in 1 pair of hands. The first was the dressing of hair, and at that she was better than her mother had been, which her mother had told her plainly, and without envy while there was still time to say it. The second was hair work, and at that nobody within 40 miles came near her. Hair work is the making of jewellery out of the hair of the dead. A bracelet plaited from a woman's hair and finished with a gold clasp, a watchguard for a widower, a brooch in which a lock has been worked into a design of wheat or willow. A family brings you a folded paper with a lock in it, and you work it over a wooden mould with weighted bobbins, the way a lace-maker works thread. And you give them back something they can wear to church. There is no other trade in which the whole value of the article lies in a fact the customer cannot check. Everything that followed came out of that. Marjorie Padgett had worked hair for 30 years and had died 14 months before, in September, of a cough that had begun in the spring and had not been much attended to because there was work in the house. Ellen had dressed her hair for the last time and taken nothing from her head for herself, which is an odd choice for a woman of her trade, and one she never explained to anybody. She had taken the green ribbon out of her mother's work basket instead. It had been in the house before Ellen was born, and it had never once tied up anything but her mother's own hair. What Ellen had also taken, and had not thought about for a year, was the work book. It was a quarto book bound in marbled boards, and it recorded every piece Marjorie Padgett had made since 1811. The date, the pattern, the weight of hair received, the name of the family, and pasted at the foot of each entry under a square of tissue 3 strands of the hair the piece was made from. That is the ordinary practice of the trade, and it exists so that a maker accused of substitution can lay the article and the sample side by side and let anybody with eyes decide. Ellen had opened it in October, meaning to look for a pattern, and had stopped at the 3rd page. There were 11 entries on the 3rd page, and 9 of them were marked, in her mother's small upright hand, with the same 2 letters in the margin. W.S. She turned pages for an hour. The letters ran the whole length of the book. Marjorie Padgett had made 141 memorial pieces, 109 of them, marked W.S., and against each of those was a sum in her mother's hand. 2 shillings, 2 and 6pence. 3 shillings for a bracelet that had gone out of the repository window at 4 guineas, because Ellen had stood in the street at 17 and looked at the ticket and thought, without any resentment at all, how fine it was that Mrs. Stroud could do such work. Mrs. Stroud could not do such work. She had been a lady's dresser for 20 years, and could put up hair beautifully, and had never in her life laid a single strand over a mould. Every memorial piece the repository had sold in 9 years had been made in a back room in Slape Lane by a woman paid a shilling in the pound who was never named to the family, and who had agreed to it in the first place because she had a child of 8, a dead husband, and no other offer. Ellen had sat with the book open until the candle guttered. She had not been angry, or not in the way people mean by the word. Anger, in her, arrived cold and settled low down and made her steadier rather than otherwise. She wrote to Mrs. Stroud on the 14th of October. The letter was 4 lines long. It said that she would continue to take commissions from the repository at the customary rate, and that she would in future require her own name to be given to the family as the maker, since a family is entitled to know whose hands have touched what they are burying their dead in. She had thought that a reasonable letter. She had thought it, in fact, generous. Mrs. Stroud read it in her back parlour with the door shut, and understood, correctly and immediately, that she was looking at the end of everything she had. If it were known in Nether Wickham that the repository had never made a memorial piece in its life, then the repository was a shop that sold pomatum, and Mrs. Stroud was a woman of 52 with a lease and no trade. She took 3 weeks to answer. Then she answered. Ellen walked home with her cropped head bare, and the rain got at her scalp in a way it never had before, and that, more than the looking-glass, was what told her what had happened. She let herself in and lit the fire. She put her hand up to the back of her neck 11 or 12 times in the first hour, the way a tongue goes to a broken tooth, and each time her fingers closed on nothing and then on the ribbon. Sally Mears came at 6 with a jug of broth and stood in the doorway with her hand over her mouth, and Ellen said, "If you cry, I shall have to comfort you, and I have not got it in me tonight. Sit down and tell me what is being said, all of it." What was being said was what Mrs. Stroud had spent 3 weeks paying out into the town the way a woman pays out line. That Padgett's girl had been selling her customers' hair to the wig makers in Nottingham, a family that has given a hair worker the last remnant of a mother or a child has handed over something no money replaces, and the fear that it will be swapped for cheap bought hair is the oldest fear in the trade and the one that closes shops. By Wednesday, Ellen had lost 5 of the 6 engagements she held for the Duke of Tarrant's ball on the 11th of December. The notes were all polite. 2 were from women whose mother's hair she had plaited with her own fingers. The 6th did not come. The 6th was from Lady Maud Selby, the Duke's aunt, 68 years old, who had buried a husband and 2 brothers and had spent the previous winter at Bath telling anybody who would listen that the modern age had no craftsman left in it. On the Friday she sent a boy the 4 miles from Tarrant Hall with a note. "I am told you have been ill-used. I am told a great many other things also, and I have decided not to attend to them. Come on Monday as arranged. Bring your work. Mrs. Selby." Refusing would have been respectable and understandable, and everyone in Slape Lane would have said she had done right, because a woman under that particular accusation has no business going anywhere near a household's dead. She did not refuse. She washed her one good gown of iron grey stuff, pressed the white muslin fichu that went with it, and on Monday morning put the workbook and her small tools into a leather satchel, tied the green ribbon into her cropped hair, and walked the 4 miles to Tarrant Hall in a frost. Tarrant Hall stood at the end of an avenue of limes, honey-coloured ashlar under a grey sky, 11 bays wide, with a portico added by a man who had wanted people to feel small on the steps, and had got his wish. Ellen went round to the side door, because she was a tradeswoman, and knew what she was. Mrs. Padgett, the housekeeper, looked at Ellen's head for exactly as long as it took to look at it, and then stopped looking, which Ellen was to remember for the rest of her life as one of the great courtesies ever done her. "Her ladyship is at her writing," she said. "You are early. Wait in the small dressing-room on the first floor. There is a fire in it, because I had one lit. The corridor on the first floor at Tarrant Hall runs 60 feet from the stairhead to the west windows, and is hung with the family in oils. And it was there, at 11:15 on a Monday in November, that Ellen Padgett and the Duke of Tarrant saw one another for the first time in their lives. Francis Aubrey, Duke of Tarrant, was 33 and had held the title 3 years since his father died in a chair in the library, with a newspaper across his knees. He was tall and black-haired, his hair parted on the left and cut close, with brown eyes under a brow that more than one hopeful mother had called forbidding. He was not forbidding. He was exact, and had discovered since his mother's death that grief is the one department of life in which no exactness is available at all. He came out of the library reading a letter and speaking over his shoulder to his steward, and what he was saying was that the Coldstone cottages would be roofed before Christmas, or he would want to know why, and he got as far as the word Christmas. Then he stopped. He stopped so completely that Mr. Beddoe, coming out behind him with the estimate in his hand, walked into his back. There was a young woman at the window end of the corridor, with a leather satchel on her shoulder, plainly dressed in iron grey, with a white fichu, and her hair had been cut off. It had been cut off badly, in a hurry, by somebody who had not cared where the line fell, and it ended ragged at the jaw, and it was a dark, reddish colour that took the light from the west windows and gave it back. She had heard him coming, and had turned, and she was looking at him with grey eyes, and no apology in them whatever. Tied into the back of that ruined hair, and pulled round over her shoulder where she had left it because there was nothing else to hold it, was a narrow ribbon of dark green watered silk. "Where did you get that ribbon?" said the Duke of Tarrant. He had not meant to say it. He heard how it sounded, and saw the woman's chin come up half an inch, and understood that he had accused a stranger of theft in his own corridor before saying good morning to her. "It was my mother's, your grace," Ellen said. "Who was your mother?" "Marjorie Padgett. She dressed the Duchess's hair for 19 years, twice a week when the family was at Tarrant, and every day when there was company." Ellen's voice didn't move at all. "She died 14 months ago. I am the hairdresser Lady Maud sent for. I am early, and I have been waiting in the wrong place, and I am sorry for it." The Duke did not answer for some time. What Ellen did not know was that in a closet off the room behind him there was a rosewood work-box, and that inside it lay a bundle of papers tied with 3/4 of a yard of dark green watered silk, faded along one edge. She did not know that he had opened that box 11 times in 22 months, and never once taken anything out of it, or that twice he had sat down on the floor beside it, which was not a thing anybody in Nottinghamshire would have believed of him. "Beddoe," he said, "the roofs will do until this afternoon." Mr. Beddoe, who had been in the house 30 years and had views, went away. "Come in here," the Duke said. The room was his mother's mourning room, and it had not been changed. There was a japanned dressing box on a side table, with the lid up, and a pair of tongs still in it, cold, from a morning 22 months ago. He brought the workbox out of the closet and set it on the table and opened it and did not touch the ribbon. "Say that again," he said. "About the ribbon." "My mother had it from the Duchess." Ellen came no closer than 4 feet. "There was a bolt of it from Coventry the year of the peace, cut up for the women of the house at Christmas. Everybody had a length. My mother never used hers for anything but her own hair. There were 14 women in this house that Christmas, and I could not tell you the name of one of them." He was looking at the bundle of papers, and not at her. "My mother tied her letters with that ribbon. I have looked at it every time I have opened this box, and never once wondered where it came from. Then you walked into my corridor wearing it, and I thought, before I thought anything sensible, that it was hers, that it had come out of this box." He turned round, "which is why I spoke to you as I did, and I ask your pardon for it." Nobody had asked Ellen Padgett's pardon for anything in 6 days. She had been holding herself together with an arrangement of small rules since Tuesday, and the rules held. She did not weep. She did not thank him extravagantly. She said, "Mine has the fade on one edge, and hers will have it on the other, because they were cut from one bolt and rolled the opposite way. Laid end to end, you would see it." The Duke of Tarrant looked at her with an expression she could not read, and that Mr. Beddoe, had he still been in the room, could have read at 40 feet. "Sit down," he said. "You have walked from Wickham. Who cut your hair?" "Mrs. Stroud of the repository." "Why?" "Because I found out something she did not want found out, and she wished me out of this house on the 11th of December. Ellen sat down and set her satchel on her knees and kept her hands on it. "Your Grace, I have come here to dress your aunt's hair and to deliver her work, and I would rather not be a piece of news in your household. May I go and wait in the dressing room?" "No," said the Duke. "There is something in this box I should like you to look at first." He brought out a small square case of black leather and opened it, and inside was a bracelet, 7 strands of light brown hair, plaited in a chain pattern, mounted with a gold clasp and a glass panel under which a spray of hair had been worked into the shape of a willow. It had cost him 9 guineas. It had come 5 weeks after his mother's funeral, in a paper parcel from the repository, with a card in Mrs. Stroud's hand assuring him that the work had been done by her own fingers, and that the hair was the hair she had taken herself from her dear late ladyship's head on the morning of the burial. Ellen looked at it for a long moment without touching it. "Your Grace," she said, "may I ask what colour your mother's hair was when she died?" "Light brown," the Duke said, "going grey at the sides. She minded about it, and your mother, I now understand, was the person who saw to it that nobody else could tell." "Thank you." Ellen looked at the bracelet a moment longer. "It is a handsome piece." "You were going to say something else?" "I was." "Then say it." "No, Your Grace." She said it quite pleasantly. A woman with her hair cut off, 6 days after being accused all over the town of selling her customers' hair, would be foolish to look at a 9-guinea keepsake of your mother's and start hinting. You would be right not to believe me. Ask me again, when I can put a thing in your hand. She closed the leather case herself and gave it back to him, and went upstairs to dress Lady Maud Selby's hair. The next 3 weeks passed in a way Ellen had not expected any part of her life to pass again. Lady Maud looked at her cropped head on the Monday, said, "Sit down and eat something before you touch me. You look like a nail," and never mentioned it again. She was a small, square woman with an appetite for detail and no interest whatever in what the county thought of her, and she had ordered a memorial brooch worked from her husband's hair, 31 years dead, carried in a paper in her writing case for 3 decades, because she had never met a maker she trusted. Ellen worked in the small dressing room on the first floor, because Mrs. Padgett had decided that a woman who walked 4 miles in a frost should have the room with the fire. She was there 3 days a week, and then 4, and then she stayed in the house, because Lady Maud had told the county that Padgett's girl had been slandered by a shop, and that she intended to be dressed by her on the 11th, and the county, which cannot bear to be left out of anything, discovered within a fortnight that it had never believed the story in the first place. The Duke came to the dressing-room door 11 times in 3 weeks. He did not come in. He stood in the doorway, usually with a paper in his hand that he had brought as a reason, and asked questions, and Ellen answered them with her bobbins going. He asked, on the 8th occasion, standing there at 9 at night with no paper in his hand at all, what his mother had talked about while her hair was being dressed, and Ellen put the bobbins down and told him. That the Duchess talked about her sons, at very great length, in the manner of a woman who had nobody else she was willing to be tedious in front of. The Duke of Tarrant stood in the doorway of his mother's dressing-room and looked at the floor for a while. "I have wanted somebody to tell me something like that for 22 months, he said, "and I didn't know there was anybody left in England who could." Meanwhile, Ellen wrote letters. She wrote to Mrs. Tibbs, the vicar's widow at Wickham, who had bought a memorial bracelet from the repository in March. She wrote to Mr. Alfred Rooke, the saddler, who had bought one in June for his wife. She wrote, with more difficulty, to Mrs. Padgett, who had bought one in January for a sister dead at 34, and had never worn it because she said it was too good. Each letter said the same thing, that she believed there was something wrong with the pieces the repository had sold since her mother's death, that she could not yet say what, and that she asked the loan of the article for one evening and would sign a paper for its value. 2 said yes at once. Mr. Rook said no twice, and then came up to the hall on the 2nd of December and stood in the yard turning his hat round. "If you are wrong about this," he said, "I would rather you had let me alone." Ellen said she knew it, and he gave it to her. She kept the 3 in a locked drawer with her mother's workbook, and she did not lay them side by side, because she found she did not want to know alone. On the 8th of December, at 4 in the afternoon, Mrs. Winifred Stroud arrived at Tarrant Hall in a hired chaise and asked to see the Duke. She had come because the county had stopped talking about the wig makers of Nottingham and started talking about Lady Maud's brooch, and because a woman who has spent 9 years standing on a plank has an excellent instinct for the moment it begins to bend. She was shown into the small dressing-room, and she had with her a flat parcel in blue paper. Ellen was at the table with her bobbins. "Do not get up," said Mrs. Stroud. Then Lady Maud came in from the bedchamber with her cap crooked, and Mrs. Padgett behind her because she had heard the chaise, and the Duke came up the stairs last, and Mrs. Stroud, finding herself with an audience of 4 in a candle-lit room, did what she had done all her life, which was to play the part with everything she had. She opened the blue paper and lifted out a rope of auburn hair 4 feet long and held it up above her shoulder so that it hung and swung in the candlelight, and turned to the Duke. "Your Grace, you have this woman in your house. I have carried this since the 17th of November because I could not bring myself to destroy it, and I ask you to consider what sort of person cuts off her own hair to sell it, and then tells the town that I did it. 4 feet, 11 ounces, 9 guineas of hair, and it went out of her own head, and I say to you that a woman who will sell her own will sell yours." It was very well done. The braid was the brightest thing in the room, swinging slowly, catching the candles, and every eye went to it, and the story it told was complete and needed nothing. The Duke of Tarrant did not look at the braid. He had come 3 steps into the room and stopped, and he was looking at the ribbon of dark green watered silk tied into the ragged ends of the hair that was left, and at Ellen's hand which had come up to it and rested there and was perfectly steady. "Put it down," he said. Mrs. Stroud lowered the braid slowly and laid it on the blue paper. "You are attending here on the 11th, I think," the Duke said. "You will come, and you will bring that with you, and your day book as well, since you have made a charge against a person under my roof, and I do not intend to settle it by candlelight with 4 women listening." "Your Grace, I am very willing to. I know you are." He was not, Ellen noticed, discourteous, and he was not enjoying it, and that was the thing about him she hadn't expected and had begun, dangerously, to like. "Mrs. Stroud, you attended my mother for 19 years. I have not forgotten it, and I shall not, whatever comes of Thursday." When they had gone, Ellen sat with her hands flat on the table. "He will not turn her out, on my word," she said. "Nor should he. Nobody should be turned out on anybody's word." "Then you had better have something better than a word," said Lady Maud Selby, "by Thursday." "I shall have 4 things," Ellen said, "if he will lend me the 4th. The ball at Tarrant Hall on the 11th of December was the largest thing the county had seen in 3 years. The saloon was lit with 140 candles, and Ellen Padgett had dressed 9 heads in it, including 2 she had been forbidden to touch in November. She came down at 10 in a gown of deep violet silk she had paid for out of 3 weeks' work, and made up with her own hands, with no trimming on it anywhere. Her hair was 3/4 of an inch longer than it had been in the repository, and looked like nobody else's in the room. The dark green ribbon was tied through it at the back. At the supper interval, The Duke of Tarrant asked the company to remain, and had a card table brought out into the middle of the floor. There were 4 small black leather cases on it. "These are 4 memorial pieces," he said, in the voice he used for tenants and magistrates, "made from the hair of 4 different people, sold from the repository at Nether Wickham in the last 11 months. This one is mine. It is my mother's. Mrs. Padgett, will you open yours? Mrs. Tibbs, Mr. Rook." They opened them. Nobody said anything for about 4 seconds. 4 bracelets lay side by side on the green baize. Each was 7 strands, plaited in a chain pattern. Each had the same gold clasp. Each had a glass panel, under which a spray of hair had been worked into a willow with 9 leaves, and on every one of the 4 the 9th leaf turned in at the tip, in exactly the same place, in exactly the same way, because all 4 had been laid over the same wooden mould in the same wholesale workshop in Nottingham, and all 4 were light brown. "Mrs. Padgett," said Ellen Padgett, quite quietly, into the silence, "what colour was your sister's hair?" "Black," said Mrs. Padgett. "Black as a kettle, all her life." "Mrs. Tibbs?" "White." The old woman had her hand at her mouth. "He was 71. Mr. Rook?" Mr. Alfred Rook did not answer. He had picked his bracelet up and was holding it in both hands. The way a man holds a thing he has just discovered is not what he was told it was, and he was looking at Mrs. Winifred Stroud, and so, by then, was everybody else. She made the only move left to her, which was forward. "They are made up to a pattern," she said. "There is no crime in a pattern. The willow is a common design, and if 4 families choose the same design out of a card, that is the family's doing, and not mine." "And the colour," said Lady Maud Selby. "Hair darkens and lightens in the working. Anybody in the trade will tell you." "Anybody in the trade," said Ellen, "will tell you it does no such thing." She stepped up to the table. "Boiled, plaited and set, a black hair is black at the end of it. I have my mother's book here, with 3 strands pasted under every entry she made for 30 years, and you may compare any of them against the article and satisfy yourselves. That is why we keep the book. That is the whole reason the book exists." "Then where is my mother's hair?" the Duke said. And Mrs. Stroud, who had answered everything that evening with the fluency of a woman who has stood in a shop for 30 years, made the one mistake that finished her, and made it because it was the only true sentence she had left. "It was not fit to work," she said. "It was fine, and it was breaking, and no one could have plaited it. And I was not going to send that family a poor article in a month like that one, and nobody was ever meant to lay them side by side." Then she heard it. Ellen did not press her. There is a moment in these matters when pressing is not only unnecessary but indecent, and she let it stand in the air of that saloon and be understood by 100 people at their own speed. Mrs. Stroud had had the hair. She had looked at it and judged it and made a decision about it, and what she had sent the Duke of Tarrant 5 weeks after his mother's funeral, with a card saying the work had been done by her own fingers, had come off a stranger's head in a workshop 40 miles away. "Dinah," said Ellen, without turning round, "how many parcels have you fetched from the coach office at the Swan for the repository this year, from Bosworth and Gans of Nottingham?" Dinah Kirk was standing against the wall with the other dressers, and she had been crying quietly for 2 minutes. 12, she said. "I have the way-bills. I kept them. I did not know what I was keeping them for." Mrs. Winifred Stroud went out of the saloon at Tarrant Hall a little before midnight, and did not come back for the blue paper parcel on the table. There was no scene. There is rarely a scene, whatever people afterwards say. She gave up the lease in February, and went to a sister at Newark, and what she left behind her in Nether Wickham was 9 years of families going quietly to their drawers to look at things they had been keeping in tissue. Ellen made 41 of them again, at cost for those who could not pay, and where a family had nothing left, she told them so plainly, and took no money. On the night itself, the workbook was opened on the card table, and read out, and Lady Maud Selby did the reading, because she said she was too old to be accused of feeling anything. 109 entries, each marked in the margin with the letters WS, each with a sum against it in the maker's own hand. 2 shillings, 2 and 6pence, 3 shillings for 11 days' work sold in a window at 4 guineas, and a name at the top of every page that not one family in that room had ever been given. Marjorie Padgett, Slape Lane, hair worker. When it was finished, the Duke of Tarrant gave 3 of the bracelets back into their owner's hands himself, and then went upstairs alone and opened a rosewood work-box and took the letters out of it for the first time in 22 months. Under the letters, folded in a paper and labelled in his mother's own writing, was a lock of light brown hair with grey in it. The paper said, "Put by. A. Aubrey." She had cut it herself in the spring before she died, being a practical woman who arranged things in advance, and it had lain 9 inches under her son's hand every time he opened that box and sat down on the floor beside it. He brought it down to the dressing-room at 1 in the morning and put it into Ellen's hands without a word, because he didn't have one, and Ellen, who had held a great many people's dead in her palms, and had never once been careless with any of it, closed her fingers over the paper and said, 11 days. Take a year if you want it. 11 days, she said. He stood in the doorway where he had stood 11 times, and this time he came in. When it is finished, said Francis Aubrey, I should like to ask you something, and I should like you to know now that it has nothing to do with hair, or with my mother, or with what you did in that room tonight. It is only that I have got into the habit of standing in doorways to hear you talk, and I have decided the habit is beneath me, and I would rather sit down. Then sit down, Ellen said. He sat down. She put her hand out on the table, palm up, and he took it, and they stayed like that a long while and said nothing of any importance at all. They were married in the September following, at the church at Nether Wickham, with Lady Maud in the front pew wearing a brooch of wheat ears worked from her husband's hair, 32 years dead, that she had waited 3 decades for. There is a shop on the north side of the square now, where the repository used to be, and the letters on it read E. Aubrey, late Padgett, and underneath, in smaller gold, hair work. The town thought this an extraordinary thing for a duchess to put over a door and got used to it in about a fortnight. She works there 3 days a week, and she has trained 4 girls, one of whom is Dinah Kirk. Her hair reaches her collar now, and she has never grown it longer, and she wears a narrow ribbon of dark green watered silk tied through it. On the wall of the back room, framed under glass, are 2 lengths of the same ribbon laid end to end, faded on opposite edges, cut from one bolt at Christmas in the year of the peace and put back together 19 years later. Her mother's shears hang on a nail beside them. She uses them every working day. She has never once thought of them as anything but hers,